Love this podcast? Support it and sponsor today. Simply head to ozcastnetwork.com for details.
In the spirit of reconciliation, Love on Campus acknowledges the Kaurna people, the traditional custodians of the land we meet on today, and we acknowledge the traditional custodians of country throughout Australia and their connections to land, sea and community. We pay our respects to their elders past and present and extend that respect to all Aboriginal, Torres Strait Islander and First Nations people.
Welcome back to Love on Campus. I am Kathleen Stanley and I'm joined today by Dr. Amy Matthews.
Hello.
And Georgia Nichols.
Hello.
And we are up to our second month of our four weekly cycles. If you've been listening along, you know that we do a 4 weekly cycle here on Love on Campus, where we start with an essential element of romance for week 1, a subgenre for week 2, a trope for week 3, and a book club for week 4. So you have officially started us off on our second lot here today. We will be starting by talking about an essential element. Before I get into that, I would just like to announce what our book club book is.
Yay!
Yay, we're very excited about this book club book. I think we did mention it over the last couple of weeks, but I thought I'd better make sure everybody knows so they can start reading as soon as they click off from listening to this week's episode, that they need to read Happy Place by Emily Henry.
Which you may already have read or be reading since it's the book of the year. I think
Absolutely.
as we're recording it, it's on a few of the New York Times bestseller lists right now.
Yeah.
Yes. So, and it probably still will be by the time this goes
for
down.
the next couple of years.
So make sure that you pick up Happy Place by Emily Henry if you're following along with the book club. If you've already read it, great, you're ahead. If you haven't read it, get on it. Last month we did cover endings as our essential element for romance.
We started at the end.
Yeah.
Yes, we did. We started at the end, and we may have not talked too much about endings by our book club. Apologies to those who were really excited for us to talk about the ending, but we didn't.
Get a little bit off topic.
We're just quite passionate about the book.
Look, things happened. Just be prepared for things to happen here. So, I'm going to move on to the next Regis element for this month. Now, we are not doing them chronological, as you can tell, by starting at the ending. That is obviously that's the last element usually of a romance.
We started there because it's the element that usually defines the entire genre. So we thought we'd look at some of the elements that are pivotal to the genre.
Yes.
And
We're just bouncing around and having fun.
Yeah, and also technically they can exist in any sort of order. Is what
That's
is
right,
said in the
because
book.
some books, let's start with the ending actually, and then you find out how they got there.
Yeah.
Yep, that's true. And I mean, if you're reading a romance, you probably know what's you know what's coming. You know the ending, really.
So happily ever after.
So, today's essential element of romance is what Pamela Regis calls the point of ritual death.
Which is quite, I find, a histrionic title.
Yeah, it sounds huge, doesn't it? It's
Yeah, it never really makes sense to me. I
It
don't know,
sounds like a
confuses me.
Victorian novel where someone's like fainting or...
which makes sense considering she uses Pride and Prejudice as her romance.
Could you also call it the black moment?
Yeah, it is the black moment.
The black moment.
Yep.
That works better for me in my head. The
I
black
think
moment.
the black moment is a writerly term, and I think point of ritual death is a literary term. Could we?
Like a critical...
Yeah. I think that is how I would probably separate them.
When I'm writing, I'm thinking about what's the black moment, where everything,
Yeah,
Go
so I'll read quickly what Regis defines the point of ritual death as, just so we have a concrete definition from Regis. So the point of ritual death marks the moment in the narrative when the union between heroine and hero, the hoped-for resolution, seems absolutely impossible. When it seems that the barrier will remain more substantial than ever, the happy ending is most in jeopardy at this point. So what do we think?
Oh, I didn't even listen.
But yeah,
I feel so loved right now, Georgia. My gosh, it feels so interesting.
I'm really bad when it's not like in front of me and I can't read it.
Me too.
I have to say, okay, so this is the thing that when I was a teenager and I was a terrible high school student because I would stay up all night reading, I would not get to sleep till 2 or 3. This is the point where it's like 1 a.m. and you get to here and you're like, I cannot see how these people are ever going to be together.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's also like sometimes really close to the end of the book and you've got like 20 pages left and you're like, how on earth can this be fixed in so few pages?
Yeah.
That always stresses me out.
Yeah, I love it when the emotional motivation is so intense that you actually can't see, because one of them is going to have to back down and you can't see how they can do it. I love that moment.
Yeah.
Yes. I have it so rarely now because I read so many romances. I feel like I'm very rarely surprised by a point of ritual death. I still enjoy them. But
I think people are nicer
so
to each other in books too. Like I think in one of the early episodes we talked about the old 80s books. Or it was just us talking. I get confused about what we actually said in an episode and what we talked
We
about
definitely talked about Joanna Lindsay and some of those.
Right.
So if you're going there,
that's
yes.
where I'm going. Is that they would have the betrayals were so kind of shocking and intense that you really couldn't see how there could be forgiveness and resolution. And then it would happen and it would be really satisfying because that black moment was so black.
Yeah, I like that. I feel like we need a little bit more of that now. I think they can be a little bit too we talk all the time. I think I sit a little bit on the opposite side of the fence of you guys where you say, why have these people not talked things out earlier? And I'm always like, I'm glad they didn't, because otherwise we'd hit the point of ritual death and I would be really bored. Like I'm glad they haven't talked it out because that's like usually where we're heading.
But I think the problem there, my problem with that is that I think the problems should shift. Like I think when I say why haven't they just talked it out, I think I'm often thinking it's the same problem.
Yes.
And they've just never had the conversation. Whereas actually in a really good romance, I think the problem evolves. That you might practice communication and get past one thing and then there's another thing and it just escalates and triggers and triggers and triggers. And I think I get frustrated when it's a bit two-dimensional. It's one problem the whole way through.
Dare I say that like the book club book that we're going to do, Happy Place, I think that it evolves a lot because they do talk about things, but how much they talk about things and how in-depth they talk about them changes.
And a lot of it's internal.
Yeah.
I think there's a lot of internal where we're working things out, which I think maybe can be where it gets frustrating is we're working it out, but they're not on the page. And it's sort of like, well, why can't they be working it out on the page and discovering new layers to the problem? Or because emotional issues are layered. They're never like, I love when.
And you backslide too, right?
Yeah.
You make an advance and then you backslide.
Yes. Exploring how like emotional journeys are not just uphill. I think that actually would be a great lesson. A lot of people, I think it's like, I've gone to therapy and I've done this work, so everything's better now.
Everything's good.
Yeah. And it's like, actually, that's so not how life works. It's like, sorry, people who go to therapy and think it's going to fix you. It is going to give you tools, but you're going to need to use those tools and you're going to grow and change and the tools are going to need a shift. And that's just how life works. Like,
Kathleen, can you go back to that quote? Can we try and break it down bit by bit?
Yeah, we can. So, the point of ritual death marks the moment in the narrative when the union between the heroine and hero, the hoped-for resolution, seems absolutely impossible. When it seems that the barrier will remain more substantial than ever, the happy ending is most in jeopardy at this point.
Right, because Michael Haig, if no one's heard of Michael Haig, he does amazing kind of masterclasses and he's a story consultant and works in Hollywood as well. But he has this really interesting thing about characters' essence versus their performed self, and that a story is about trying to get those two things to align. They're bringing down the performed mask, and so that they can, he calls it standing in their essence.
I like that.
And I think the barrier is often your social or your performance.
Yes. Breaking those masks down.
Yeah.
Because that's what love is, right? Is letting someone see behind the mask to who you really are. And that's terrifying.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Absolutely. I find
Definitely.
this stuff all really confusing. Like if I had to explain what it looks like in my head, it's like a big squiggle. Like
Just like people.
Like I can genuinely like feel my brain becoming like all confused because this sort of stuff is really difficult. Like it's the inner workings of human emotions and relationships, and it's so difficult to figure out.
I think of it like babushka dolls. You know those Russian babushka dolls, and you're like, you start like, and everyone thinks you're this big doll, and then romance is actually getting to that tiny little doll that's in the middle, and discovering that you love that little tiny doll in there, but so can someone else.
Yeah, it's a bit like let my doll meet your doll.
Yeah. Let's take off all the dolls until we get to our tiny doll in the middle. This is. I should have used an onion metaphor.
No, I like the babushka doll one. That's good.
The babushka doll one just felt more like human. Onion felt too Shrek. So also Regis talks, so like she calls it the point of ritual death, which like you said, Georgia, you're more familiar with it as the black moment. But point of ritual death obviously has a little bit more of a connotation towards that death. And I find it interesting that she really aligns it with death and life. And I noticed that when I was rereading up about the point of ritual death in the Regis chapter where she talks about it, she actually really talks a lot about the Hades and Persephone myth.
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah, and she and when she defines it with Pride and Prejudice, she talks about it being Lydia's elopement with Wickham as a point of ritual death, which, yeah, I know. I always get surprised, and I don't know why I always get surprised that it's that moment in Pride and Prejudice.
Because she thinks that Darcy enabled it?
Well, to me, it's also because she's taken it to, so we're talking here about emotional, right? Like I just did a metaphor about dolls and the internal doll. So it's like your internal self, and Amy's talking about masks. So we're talking about an emotional moment. But Regis actually puts it down to a literal moment, like a thing, something that's actually outside.
External versus internal.
Yeah, it's a very external. I'm like, I find it interesting Regis's elements do tend to avoid and dance around that real emotional gooey center that I think is actually the whole point
But I
of
think
romance.
that's partly because her focus is so backwards facing, like it's looking at literature of the 19th and early 20th century, right? And it was her rules are published in 2003, and so a whole bunch of romance has happened since then. And I think the focus on the interior journey has been talked about in certainly romance publishing for as long as I've been around, and that's probably why I find her a little difficult as a romance writer.
Yeah.
What does she say the point of ritual death is in the Hades Persephone myth? Do you know?
I have foolishly not written exactly it down, but I think I
I'm trying
could.
to figure it out.
Let me. If you just hear papers, I'm rustling through my notes.
Yeah, I'm like,
Bear with me.
I imagine it's the
What, when Demeter takes a like the
moment she eats and she can't. Oh well, no, that doesn't make sense. I don't know.
I don't know where it is because also the myth is so.
Why did I bring it up?
The myth has so many elements as well. Like there's so many external things that happen in it. So I don't.
Yeah, I'm like, I just thought it was really interesting that she like harkens it back to this idea of literally the god of death.
Yeah. Also, the idea that that Hades and Persephone have a romance or like a loving relationship.
Yeah,
hilarious.
I think it's not. I don't think she's using it in the same way as Pride and Prejudice.
No.
I
Here we
think
go.
I've
I've got
that.
the Persephone quote, so I'll read it out.
Great.
So Regis says, death itself or an event equated with death threatens or actually transpires at this point when the barrier seems insurmountable. So this is when I'm guessing Persephone's taken to the underworld, right?
Yeah.
The death is, however, ritual. The heroine does not die. So Persephone doesn't die when she's taken to the underworld. She is freed from its presence, and this freedom is the mythic counterpoint to the freedom that results from the lifting of the barrier. The reader's response again is joy, because Persephone doesn't stay in the underworld; she's brought back.
Yeah, she has like half.
She just has to
Half
return
and
half
to
to
it,
half and half.
right?
Yeah.
Because she ate the pomegranate seed.
Yeah.
So it's this idea that the cyclical nature, I suppose, of identity, because it's really about the heroine. Like the point of ritual death in romance is about the heroine coming to some kind of realization about herself. So if we think about Pride and Prejudice, the moment Lydia absconds with Wickham, and go Lydia, I'm a big Lydia fan.
Oh, really?
Yes.
Yeah,
oh my
she's
goodness.
great.
I don't
Do you
know
not like
Awesome.
Lydia?
I'll do a reading.
Well, I don't know. I haven't really thought about it.
I'll do a reading for you sometime.
Amy and I will sit you down and convince you like Lydia.
She was amazing. If you take away, I'm just going to hijack this whole podcast right now. But if you take away the fact that if you take away the 19th century Jane Austen sensibility as you read it, and remember Pride and Prejudice is written by a virgin, right? What you have is a kind of lusty woman. Like Lydia is 15, so she's underage, so should not be judged. But also she's described as too tall, too loud, too much. She's really aggressive. She gets into it. She's
literally the opposite of Jane.
And Elizabeth, and Elizabeth judges her all the time.
Yeah.
But actually Lydia seems to know exactly what she's doing.
Yeah.
Always. She runs off to Brighton and has a great time with the troops. She ends up marrying the guy that Elizabeth liked and getting money out of Darcy so they can live well forever. And I think they travel. They go to India. She's like really adventurous and cool. But also they made her marry her rapist when she was 15. So she deserves some sympathy in my opinion.
Yeah, I think the Wickham thing hurts it for me. I'm like, oh, Wickham? Why did she have to, that hurts it for me. But you know.
But that's hating Wickham, not hating
that's
Lydia.
hating Wickham, and you know,
And fair. Wickham is a dick.
Yeah, but Elizabeth judges her for all these things where I'm like, oh, you dried up old prune. I know this is not like a popular opinion because Janeites love Elizabeth Bennet, but there's moments like she judges Lydia for being silly when she just buys an ugly hat on a whim, and it's like I would do that.
well,
like
those are her prejudices, aren't they? Really?
Yeah, that's the point of Elizabeth. Is she's so flawed.
She's so prejudicial. Yeah.
So the point of ritual death, I think, is when they run off. This is such a shame, right? It's a feeling of shame for the entire family, and it reinforces everything Darcy initially thought of the Bennets. And that's humiliating for Elizabeth, right? This is a moment where her social standing is at its lowest.
I was going to say, and it's also a huge threat to the entire Bennet family for marriageability. Like the reflection of Lydia shaming them by having an elopement, by it not going through proper means, by them, it actually degrades, it devalues because of how effed up the entire system was back then. And
so
still
even
is.
if we thought that Elizabeth and Darcy getting together was like a relatively large jump from their social standing to begin with.
Yeah, this
now
is
it's just even more. Like
it's impossible now unless Darcy fixes it, which she does. But like,
but
and he
that
fixes it for
requires
love.
him wanting to, right?
Yeah.
yes,
Yeah.
And that requires him seeing her value beyond a social being, like as a human being.
and him hearing her rejection and still hoping she'll change her mind because she's rejected him at this point.
Yeah,
But he also, I think, takes on board some of what she says, right?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
So-
Yeah, he does.
I can't help it. I always will like Darcy. I know he's a bit of a. I know.
I
but
like
do.
Matthew McFadden Darcy. Although now that he's playing,
Now he's in Succession. It's a bit weird.
now he's in Succession. He's talking about like castrating and marrying Greg.
Oh my gosh, it's so weird. I had to look him up because I'm like, why do I know his face?
Yeah,
did
and
the
he's
same thing.
Darcy. He's Darcy. And he had a bit of a moment.
It's a bit heartbreaking, but I kind of think it might be why I still like Tom, despite how horrible he is in the show. I'm like, oh, but you
I
played
know.
Darcy once.
Well, he had a bit of a moment in one of the episodes, like where he says this sort of very romantic thing to Shiv, and everyone's like, "Oh my god, Darcy!" Like that's why he's Darcy, like because he can like deliver that line, and it's like manipulative in the TV show, but he delivers the line, and you go, "Oh yeah, like that's Darcy, like that's why we love him because he's good at it."
So I think the one thing I would also say about that moment is it's a moment when Elizabeth has to have the worst possible thing happen to her, right?
Yeah,
The worst possible thing is all element of pride in her family is removed at this point. That Darcy has seen them at their worst.
Yeah, because I always struggle
Yeah,
to
and he's
understand
fine
how
with
it
it.
could be the worst thing for Elizabeth, who didn't really want to get married and didn't really care about all those things. But yeah, I think,
Which is
it's
silly
the pride,
in that-
right?
In the economic system, that's a silly perspective anyway.
Yeah. And I kind of was like, I always thought, what a weird thing to have that as the point of ritual death for Elizabeth. I get it for more Darcy, but you're right. Like it's the pride, like the shame when because she's so arrogant, isn't she, really?
and I suppose also
If
then
you love Lydia, yes, she is.
but also like a sense of disappointment because they sort of get to know each other and like each other when she goes and stays with what's her name? Can't remember. And maybe
Mrs. Collins.
yeah. And she like
her friend. What's her friend's name?
Yeah.
Who marries Collins?
who marries Collins.
Charlotte?
Charlotte.
And because she rejects him during that.
So no,
During that?
before I think is it
Before in the movie, during I don't even know.
I'm
during the
confused
book.
now.
I'm confused at what we're even talking about now. Got
But
lost.
like she like forms a sort of she really doesn't like him.
She rejects the priest guy, and then Charlotte marries him, and then she goes to visit them.
Yeah.
And then Darcy.
And then
And then
Darcy
Darcy-
says, like
he
he
basically says, "I don't want to, but I like
but
you."
like you, and she goes,
It's really awful that I like
"Yeah, it
you, but I
is."
like
yeah.
you.
And I don't even like when does their like sort of attachment and interest to each other really grow? It's not really in the book that much. I don't know. And so like, why does she get? Yeah, I understand what you say, Kathleen, when you're like, why does she get so disappointed that then it definitely wouldn't happen? Like that she definitely
This is an
wouldn't
identity
marry.
issue for Elizabeth
Mm.
because she has always kind of been prided on her cleverness and her, and she got tricked by Wickham.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
So
But it's not the way we look at black moments and point of ritual death in a modern romance, I would say. Like, it's very nuanced and it's very interesting talking it out, but I do think it's still quite external.
Okay, so
Yeah, it
what
is
would
quite
what would it
external.
be now?
Well, I'm trying to think of.
Don't use
I
our
d-
case.
well,
No,
yeah, I
don't use
know.
Happy Place. I'm trying to
Because
think of the
we're
other
still
ones.
gonna get to our book club.
Could we think about previous Emily Henrys? Like what? Wait, what is it?
I was even going to say Love on the Brain. Would we say it's the moment where they split up, right? Like they've kind of been together. And I'm trying to think of how it went down and how they separated because she couldn't go through with it or something. Oh, no. My brain is – I've read too many books. This is the problem.
in Book Lovers, the external one is that he wants to stay and help his family, and she's going back to New York. But I can't remember.
And
what
there's
the
the
internal
sister
one is.
as well.
And the sister.
Like she feels like she needs to protect her sister.
Yeah, but I'm trying to. Maybe they're less easy to define in modern romances
usually,
because they're
like,
more internal.
I don't know. There's a heap of external in contemporary.
Mm.
I think in historicals you find quite a lot of external
Yeah, it's all like
complications. And and in certain subgenres, we're really talking rom-coms. Like
Yeah.
just to come clean, that's kind of the focus of our podcast. But if you were to look at romantic suspense or adventure or crime or horror, like there are romance horrors like with vampires and stuff. If you were to look at other subgenres, I think you would find a lot more external reasons. But I think in rom-coms, the focus is really internal.
Yeah.
I'm actually wondering too if it's something that seems external but we can tell it's triggered by the internal. So
I think the flat share might be a good example.
Yeah,
Yeah.
because isn't it usually because I was reading Goal Motivation Conflict, it's sort of a mesh of the external and internal.
yeah, I do. I think it's where they come together where an external event pushes your emotional
Yeah.
barrier to the point where it breaks basically and you go, I can't, I'm too scared. And it's about it coming back around. I think a person who does point of ritual death quite well with mixing this emotional element is Maisie Yates.
Yep.
I think a lot of her cowboy books, she has a really great way of showing there is an emotional vulnerability between the couple the whole way through. And then there will be some external thing that makes them face it and makes them realize they haven't overcome whatever it is, and it pushes them apart again and they have to go away. And I think for me, it's actually what recovers it. So the thing that recovers in Pride and Prejudice, why I find it really external is because the thing that recovers it is Darcy pays them off, and that's actually what fixes the problem. Whereas in a point of ritual death in most romances that I read, at least, it's actually not the physical thing getting fixed. It's the emotional thing getting fixed. That means they can overcome it. Does that make sense?
And I think like Beth O'Leary's The Flat Share is a really good example of this.
Yeah,
Yes.
I'm trying to remember what it is.
So there's like Leon has his brother in prison.
Yeah.
And there's the trying to, clear his name. There's a really big external plot point. But then what's her name? The heroine? Tiffy. Tiffy's
she's on stage.
ex-husband,
Yeah.
ex-partner,
Boyfriend.
he's a stalker and he's abusive, and he pops up again. And so Leon is triggered because this is the thing he's been working for years, is to get his brother out of prison, and he owes this debt of responsibility to his brother, and he loves his brother. And so that is happening at the exact same time that Tiffy is stalked and triggered and forced into some
I
kind
was
of
going to say,
emotional
it's,
meltdown.
and it's the proposal, right? It's the
Yeah.
moment that her ex proposes on stage.
on stage in front of everybody.
And Leon thinks she says yes. And because he's so emotionally insecure, he assumes that she's gone back to him and doesn't understand. And because she was still dealing with her trauma, she doesn't immediately say no loudly on stage.
No, because she's frozen.
So she's frozen in her trauma. And so she deals with it privately, but then there's this whole moment of him not knowing that's what's gone on.
And both of those external factors get them to their black moments emotionally, and both hero and heroine have a black moment that is interior and their own. They're not responsible for each other's black moment.
And then it's them coming together because ultimately they still live in the same place. It forces them to then face it. And he actually hides because he goes off to his mum's, I think, and doesn't come back to the apartment. So he doesn't get the news, and it's actually somebody else that has to say to him, she said no. And he realises his mistake in just assuming the worst of people and assuming that so his emotional sort of stuff there, he realises he was silly for not taking that chance, and so he rushes back to the apartment to sort of reconnect with her because he realises he wasn't there for her during this really vulnerable
So it is more based
moment.
around him, which is interesting.
Because both of them, because she
but
could
what
have.
does she realise? Like he realises that
She
he
comes
was
through
too-
the trauma. Like I think 'cause
Yeah.
it takes her the whole book to recognise that she was abused.
That's true.
She gets so gaslit, she's not seeing it. And then to be able to say to Leon, this is what happened to me, this is what is happening to me, this is how...
Yeah, because she hasn't told anyone about that abuse that she was suffering. She kept it all inside.
But I don't think she even knew
She
it
didn't
was.
really know.
No.
Yeah, because it's
God,
quite
it
a
is really
slow
good.
journey.
It is very
really good.
Really good. External, internal, coming
Yeah.
together, but independent of each other, and God.
Yeah, and there's a moment she has to face down her ex, and there's a moment Leon has to follow through with saving his brother and dealing with all the complicated emotions that happened with their... I think it's a really great example, actually.
Have you guys watched the TV show of it?
Not yet, no.
No, I've only watched the first few episodes.
It's not very good.
It doesn't translate as well, I don't think.
No.
I'm a bit into Queen Charlotte at the moment.
Oh, I love
it's good.
Queen Charlotte. I just finished it. Oh, gosh,
I
I
haven't
cried.
finished it yet.
We're going to have to talk about it off mic.
George,
Otherwise we'll never
George
stop.
is so charming.
Yeah.
Oh,
and
isn't he
complicated.
just? Oh, he's beautiful.
Yeah. Dare I
Yeah.
say I don't love him?
Oh, I found
Well,
his
like I
first
think he's
scene-
very good.
The first scene where he stops her climbing the
Yeah.
wall.
Oh,
is
yeah.
so
Fabulous.
charming.
Oh my God, so charming. But yeah.
Actual
We're gonna
Prince
get
Charming.
too into it.
Anyway,
Yeah, no, I better
more
not say
Prince. Yeah.
Okay,
We'll never
okay.
stop.
I have a question. How hard is this to write in a romance? Because you guys are both romance writers, like ahead of me. So how hard is this to write in a romance, The Point of Ritual Death?
It is fine if you've got your characters right.
Yeah. Which I don't, and so it's hard. So it's hard at the moment. But yeah, it makes sense if you know where they're going and what's stopping them and what's scaring them.
If you can think about the worst possible thing to happen to this person and make it happen, it's fine. But you have to know them so well to know what that would be.
Yeah. Is it hard to not do it too early?
I have not struggled with that yet, no. But again, I may have said here before, I've said on the Word Docs podcast that for me, doing the first third of the book takes most of the time, like setting up the characters, the motivations, what they want, their fears. I think really finding their wound, like what they're really hurt by in the past, is really important for getting to that black moment, because whatever they're hurt by, you have to re-traumatize them in the black moment. They have to be hurt by it again.
Again, the squiggle in my brain, because I am so bad at like forming that connection. So developing those ideas about character and what their biggest fear is and what would scare them the most
I think
can be difficult to me.
To be honest, I think we cop out a bit in fiction. I think we make fiction simpler and simpler than real life.
Mm-hmm.
And Hemingway said you can't lift a person from real life without lifting their entire context, that they don't work on the page unless they have the context of real life, because people are the product of their experiences and their context. And so I think often in a early draft and in bad books, people never get past that slightly wooden, like light version of a person. You really have to spend the time on the psychology, I think.
You do. And that's what I find difficult. And but I think if you figure that out, like Amy said,
you're still
works.
writing. Like you haven't finished the book yet.
No.
So I think it's
But I think I started it too quickly. Like I think I got way too into it too quickly and didn't think enough in that first third, like you were saying, about the characters' intentions and worries and fears and context.
Yeah, this is how writing works, though.
Yeah.
You know,
I was going to say, I don't know if I would say too early either. Like, you've got to write what you're feeling in those moments, and you just got to remember that the first thing you've written isn't, like, it's not like it's a tattoo that's in your skin forever. Like, you're going to go back and rewrite.
Oh, yeah. Like, there's 45,000 words there, and they're there.
Yeah.
And they might not exist
you probably
soon,
use
but
a lot of what's in there you'll probably end up using.
It's just like these sorts of character, like these little minute things about character that I need to think about more.
But this is where these beat sheets and where like these rules are helpful, I think.
Yes,
That,
I agree.
If you can go through and you think, okay, well, I have to hit the beat of attraction. I have to hit the beat of some kind of conflict. I think we were talking this morning about I went to a writers group last night and someone was using Jamie Gold, Jami Gold, her beat sheets for romance, and I thought she refers to them as pinch points, and I quite liked that.
Love that.
Pinch point number 1 and pinch point number 2 that work you towards the black moment, the point of ritual death.
And I think if you're thinking about if I'm gonna murder this analogy of the Babushka dolls in our point of ritual death, if I'm going to bring that up again, but I think the thing is the difference between different types of writers and maybe the different level. I don't like to say bad writing, but perhaps underdeveloped writing versus really
Or
impressive,
naive writing.
versus those people who are just so good, and you just go, God, I wish I could write like that, or like that's the kind of thing I want to get to, is the people who are not afraid to pull as many dolls out as they need and work their way to the dolls, like weave them in. And I think some people, especially when you first start out, you think 1 or 2 layers of the Babushka dolls is enough, but you need 7 or 8 sometimes. Like your book needs to go right down deep into that tiny little inner fear, that tiny little inner child that's sitting in the middle there, that's been birthed into
really
the trauma.
Because the workshop I went to last night was run by Trish Morey, and she was talking about squeezing the juice out of every little bit of your story. And I think that's a really good thing to think about character too, is have you squeezed all the juice out of this, or are you just kind of tapping it? Like,
See, I feel like I want to jump right to the little mini Babushka doll, and that's a problem. Like, I'm not good at being slow about it.
It's good if you know what that tiny Babushka doll is, but you just got to remember how many dolls it needs to get through to be there.
Or you do what Emily Henry does, which is you might start with the little one and then jump back and forth in time where you see it at different stages of fatness.
That's right. It's like, and I think what Emily Henry does awfully often is give us a doll or two right before the end. Right before the end. And then she jumps us through time a lot in her books and takes us back to the very big doll, and then takes us to, here's the doll where it was around the middle, and here it was a few steps before that and a few steps after. And then when you get to the end, she finally gives you the big reveal of the tiny one in there. Sometimes you see it coming a bit easier because you've seen the development of the dolls the whole way through. It's not been chronological. But that's the point. That's the best part about writing, is you actually can play with them. Scatter them however you like.
And some of the fun, I think, Georgia, is if you do the work on the character at the beginning, you don't need to overthink the beats.
Yeah.
They just kind of come, like, because you know them so well that they're just hurtling towards their rewounding, basically.
So do we think that the point of ritual death is bigger and more important than all the other barriers, or is that a too big a statement to make?
I don't know. It probably depends on the book, because I think sometimes the penultimate barrier can be bigger, but it's a bit like trauma, right? The black moment can just be where they've hit exhaustion and they can't fight to keep their mask up anymore.
Yeah. Especially if it's a consistency, I think, the whole way through, then the barrier would be almost the same the whole way through. They're just revealing it in a different light or in different challenges, or putting it under different types of pressure.
Yeah, so some people, it might be self-doubt, right? Like it might be they have no self-esteem and don't believe in themselves, and so you want to get them to the point where they back themselves, and that can be a series of moments where you see how low their self-esteem is, And then I think often either people get angry and fight back for themselves, or they get too tired hating on themselves, or they go on some journey where they learn to love themselves. Do you know? Like there are various different problems you can introduce. Like it can be addiction, it can be abandonment, it can be abuse, it can be – what else is there? There's a lot. There's a whole list of traumas that you can look at. And some of them, like Emily Henry does not major ones. They're things that happen to most of us.
Yeah,
it's very like family based, if you will. I don't know.
And or they're just even like something very relatable. Hers are very relatable. Like just very – she doesn't – overcomplicate it. I think that's a bit of a mistake sometimes. People think they need to they think it needs to be overly complicated. And I actually don't think it has to be that complicated, because human nature is not that complicated. It's just that we put a lot of complications between it, and that's what you have to unravel. Yeah. And then you discover that, it's actually this very simple thing of I'm just scared, or I just don't trust myself, or I just don't trust you, and that's actually very simple and easy to understand, but it's all the crap we put in between that to make it seem so much bigger than it is, to convince ourselves that it's worth holding on to.
Yeah, and Georgia mentioned Deb Dixon's goal, motivation and conflict. I think that's such an elegant way as a writer to get to this barrier, because it's goal is what do you want, what do they want? Motivation is why do they want it, and then the conflict is what gets in the way. Why can't they have it? And you should have an external and an internal for all of those. But there's always a reason we can't have what we want, right?
Yeah.
Like we always get in our own way.
I think one of the things too that I find interesting about the fact that Regis calls it a point of ritual death is that it's about healing.
Yeah. It's about, like, that's the Persephone myth, right? Like spring comes. When she comes back from the underworld, spring arrives.
Yeah. So I find it really interesting because it's, and I get it, she's saying a ritual death, not a literal death, but this idea of you have to die before you can heal, like as in you have to really rip the wound open. You have to really get deep in it before you can heal it, which is so the opposite of how I feel about healing. But it's interesting.
It's not. It's kind of about the death of your denial. I think, or the death of your perceptions about yourself or other people, or the death of the things that have not worked for you. It's putting down all the behaviours that do not work for you and being reborn into a new set of behaviours that are functional.
And I guess if you're talking about masks like you were earlier,
we've got
the
lots
rituals
of metaphors going on.
Yeah, but the ritual of putting on your mask every day.
So tiring.
Yeah.
We all do it.
Yeah.
It's so tiring.
It really is. And I think, that the ritual of doing that has to die before you can heal whatever it is that you needed to put the mask on in the first place.
And and it's all about getting to the point where you are capable of loving another human being and being loved in return, which is that's a really hard thing to do.
Gosh, you go kind of deep with the we can't. You have to, don't you?
I've gone a bit silent because I keep thinking about my book. It's triggering a lot of thoughts.
It's very heavy. It's like a very heavy moment. It's a very vulnerable moment. I think we're getting heavy because you can't help but feel like it's heavy as you talk about it.
And that's where I think she's histrionic, whereas Black Moment has a little bit more zest to it, because this can happen in a comedy. Like, it doesn't have to be a big sad reveal. It can be really funny.
Yeah. Oh, 100%. 100%. So do we have any favourite, which, considering we were struggling to think of one, I feel like I wrote this question down to say, let's see, what's our favourite point of ritual death moments? And I'm like,
cannot think of any.
What about your movies? If you're not books, think about a movie. Do you have a favourite one in a movie?
So blank. I'm so blank.
It can be tough. And you know what? I wrote it down and didn't write down one for myself. Like, surely I have time. I had time to think this out. I wrote the question. No, still didn't.
What happens When Harry Met Sally?
Oh, I love that one. That's a great one, because what happens is they sleep together and he does his usual thing of like, oh my God, I got to get out of here, and completely betrays her when they've got this friendship.
Yeah.
And so then she's like, right, I'm done with you. That's it. And she won't be friends with him anymore because he treated her just the way he treats every other woman.
Yeah. So the only reason I bring that up is because I remember his like moment of enlightenment where he's like,
Yeah.
I want to spend my time with her.
Yeah,
That's
so
what
he's the one that's on a journey.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's a pretty good one.
Yeah, I think that's pretty good because he has to get to a point of like she is not like every other woman.
Yeah, and he knows that, but he still treats her like that anyway.
Well, because he regresses. So Michael Haig talks about that coming into your essence, that there will always be a moment before the black moment where the mask comes down and you get the character in their essence briefly. And this is in a romance. You always have a section of the book where you see them together and see they could be happy before something goes wrong again.
Yeah. There's this movie that I like that probably no one else does. Because
I may not have seen it.
It's not the best movie. It's a little bit of an older one now. It's called Letters to Juliet.
Yeah, I haven't watched it in ages.
Yeah, it's this. I have this weird.
Yeah, Nicholas Sparks.
No.
It's got Amanda Seyfried in it.
Yeah. And Chris Egan, who's an Australian, he's doing Home and Away. And it's got, oh my gosh, I've forgotten her name. She's a beautiful, brilliant old actress.
It's not Vanessa,
looking it up.
Vanessa Redgrave, no.
I think it is.
Is it Vanessa Redgrave?
I think it is.
Wait, because I was looking up that whole family the other day.
Yeah, no. And anyway, while you guys look that up, I will just say.
It is Vanessa Redgrave.
Yes, yeah, and she's so beautiful. She's just amazing. And it's this, and I mean, it's a beautiful movie for me. Like, I have Italian heritage, so it's like this beautiful thing where they go on a road trip around Italy trying to find her long-lost love. And it's very cute, but... and she gets she doesn't really, it's kind of like two stories in one because Vanessa Redgrave's got this moment where she's trying to reconnect. Like she married somebody else, she's had a life, and she's now, her and her grandson are off trying to find this love, this boy in Italy she left behind and didn't end up running away with, just to see what happened to him. And, she gets this lovely, there's this moment where they think they're never going to find him and they say, this is the last one, and it's still not him, and she's devastated, and they pull into a winery at the last minute, and of course he's there. Of course he is, and it's beautiful. But it's essentially about the grandson and this girl, played by Amanda Seyfried, who she joins them on their trip around Italy because she's the one that sent the Juliet letter, because it's all about these Juliet letters. That's how the grandmother remembers that she left this man behind, because she wrote a letter to Juliet saying, what should I do? And she finds it hidden in the wall, and she sends it back to her and says, I hope you found, I don't know what happened, but I hope you found and all this stuff. And they show up and she goes along with them because she thinks it'll make a great story. She's not actually a journalist, but she wants to be. And her and the grandson connect. But they don't fall in love traditionally because they can't, because she has a fiance.
Oh, wow.
And she's on a
we don't want to hate her.
No, well, she's on a pre-wedding.
She's there with her husband.
She's there with her fiance. Yeah. They're on a pre-wedding holiday because they know he's about to open a restaurant and he knows they might not be able to go on a honeymoon straight away after they get married, and this is their opportunity to go away. So it's supposed to be like a pre-honeymoon.
Look, having a fiance is a pretty insurmountable barrier.
Well, it's the brilliant thing about it is that it's why it is their point of ritual death though at the end of the day, because she feels so much loyalty to this man she's come with and worked to be with, and she was supposed to be on her honeymoon, and even though every reason, you can see it's so obvious, this movie's so obvious for why they shouldn't be together, and he's not even a bad guy, he's just got they're just not meant to be.
It's like in Seattle where he's not a bad guy.
Yeah.
They're just not
meant to be. But because he's not a bad guy and he's so kind and understanding and nice, she can't let him go. So she's fallen in love with this other guy, but she has to walk away because she feels this intense guilt at going after what she wants, and she might be doing the wrong thing. And there's a whole history of her being abandoned as a child that I think ties into why she feels this way. And then eventually when she goes back to New York with her fiance, she realizes, oh my God, I don't love you. And we're both going to make each other, we're actually going to have a miserable life together if I try to force something to work rather than go for what I want. And she sort of realizes she can't mirror what Vanessa Redgrave did, that she can't miss the opportunity to fall in love with the guy now. She can't wait until she's in the golden years of her life. And so she comes back and fights for like the guy. And it is like for me, I think it's a really nice moment because it's not this big dramatic evil or this big, you actually understand why she goes back with her fiance. Like, you don't want her to, you want her to be with the other guy, but you do get it.
Yeah.
And sometimes the point of ritual death can be simply that it was simply that they found the guy. Vanessa Redgrave's happy ending was the point of ritual death for the grandson and this girl.
That's
and I was,
really interesting.
yeah, it was really cool.
Oh, I should rewatch that.
Yes. Sorry, I've got a really long story about this movie.
That's fine. There's all these Juliet fans in the audience who are like, I love that movie.
Yeah, probably like 2 of you because I feel like there's only 3 of us that really loved it. I watch it every year. It's a weird one for me. I really like it. It's not necessarily the world's best rom-com, but I love it,
Some
okay?
people just have your little attachments to certain movies. I love Angus Thongs and Perfect Snogging.
Me too. That's really
I-
that is a popular movie
I've
though.
never seen it, so
Oh
we may
my
need
God.
a double feature where you watch Empire Strikes Back and I watch that.
Angus Thongs and Perfect Snogging is so good, Amy.
Oh yeah, we all bring our rom-com. So I'll bring Letters to Juliet, you
Yeah.
bring Angus Thongs Perfect Snogging, and then Amy, you
Yeah.
bring Empire Strikes Back, and we'll have a movie marathon.
They're the weirdest collection of films. I have to
weird, but
say.
it's great.
It's gonna be terrible.
I'm trying to think of what the point of ritual death is in the Angus Thongs and Perfect Snogging.
Oh, it's been so long since I've seen that. That's a YA one kind of too as
Yeah,
well.
but it's great because
We should probably do a month of movies.
yeah.
that would be great.
We always end up talking about movies. We tie them in. I
Because
think
they're just easy because everyone
I
knows
think writers
them.
do
Yes.
because
Yeah.
it is a lot easier than because you often need the book in front of you.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think a lot happens in the book, and we read the way we all read. We're reading 3 or 4 romances at once, and we get them all muddled.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, so I think we can wrap it up for this week on Point of Ritual Death with my very long explanation of Letters to Juliet to take you out. We will not talk about Happy Place's Point of Ritual Death
Until book club week.
Yeah, we'll talk about a book club week because I think there's a lot to talk about with the Happy Place one. But I think that is everything. Does anyone have any final comments they want to make on this element for this week?
This has been really insightful for me.
Only that now everyone's going to notice it when they read it in books.
Yeah.
Yes.
Welcome to our world.
Yeah. Enjoy reading and enjoy discovering your point of ritual death, whether you're writing it, reading it.
And enjoy the happily ever after that comes straight after the point of ritual death.
Yeah, don't worry. In a romance, you know there's going to be recovery. That's the best part about romance. All right, well, we'll see you all next week.
What's next week? Hold on, wait a minute. What are we doing next week?
Next week is our subgenre of vacation romance.
Ooh, so come back so you can come on vacation with us.
Yeah, let's go on holiday next week. Okay, bye.
Bye.
Love this podcast? Support it and sponsor today. Simply head to AuscastNetwork.com for details.